This is an introduction to how to name individual channels in the Rangecast player. In the Rangecast player, in the most basic view called Play All Channels, each channel is represented on its own button, and ideally this will be represented with the name of the channel in a understandable but brief way. These names of individual channels are also carried over and used in other views in addition. For example, when you make a customized view, when you say to put channels on their own buttons, you'll use the same names for those channels on these simplified views with a more focused geographic region or other qualities that you're putting together onto a single view. To name channels, this is done in the programming system. This is part of the administration for your hub. There is an option for the channel reception editor which defines how the scanners are programmed, and this provides a list of all of the channels that are received through your scanners at your hub. When you're in the programmer, there is an option called Constellation, accessible under the navigation bar, which pulls up a very large table that lists all of the channels. We'll simplify that a bit by going from what's in the channel database to just what's in the programming for the scanner, which will be a shorter list. And in this list of channels, which as you can see is quite long, we have next to each of the channels, we have a button label shown here in green, for instance Blue Ridge Fire, and that corresponds to what's shown in the player. So if we go back to the player and we go to all channels, we'll see that we have Blue Ridge Fire right here. That name is taken from the programming utility, from this line here that technically describes the channel and says that it should be received and gives it a specific name. If you want to name a channel, because by default the system will name channels just with their frequency, which is a generally unique identifier but not as useful. If you want to name the channels in the utility program here, you can fill in under the new column, you can fill in text. So if I was to type into this box, I was to type, for instance, Blue Ridge Fire Department FD, for instance, and I was to save that, then on the player that would become the name of the channel. And similarly, you can optimize these names to express what you need. These names should generally be fairly short because they need to fit on the player in that grid format, which is quite compact. So often there's a process of trying to figure out how to succinctly express the meaning of a particular channel. Now, in many cases, this is not the most efficient way to go because many regions will have, for instance, in a trunk system, you might have dozens of tactical channels in an agency, which you generally wouldn't want to have on their own buttons. And so in that kind of situation, it's not time efficient to go in and actually name each channel. Instead, we use other techniques to combine channels onto individual buttons so that each of those TAC channels doesn't need to be individually named if you're only going to see it in combination with all the rest on a single button. But when possible, it is advantageous to go through and do this kind of work here to label each of the channels with a name that will be understandable and comprehensible and meaningful in your local environment. When you have finished naming channels or editing the names in this fashion, the way this information is saved is at the very bottom of this page. There's a button called Apply Changes. You would click Apply Changes. That will read the text out of these boxes. And then after you're done with that, you go to the top, you would go to Save Options, and you'd press the Save button. That will save the information, and then anyone who launches the player after that will have access to those new names as what the individual channels are called.